Hello, everyone. My name is Nazish. I lead the design strategy and research team at Grab. I'm based in Singapore, but we do have team members in Indonesia, and the research we do is all around Southeast Asia.
Hello, my name is Henny. I run the research ops at Design Strategy and Research. I'm based in Jakarta.
So, today we're going to give you a flavor of the types of research that we do at Grab, and more importantly, how we adapted when the pandemic struck. Our key takeaways will be summarized in 5 points. These are simplicity, scalability, security, sensitivity, and survival. We'll go through them one by one, but first, let's get started on what research looks like at Grab. At Grab, we place a huge premium on doing exploratory research to discover the unknown unknowns. This is beyond the usual usability studies. Our team is obsessed with defining problem spaces and opportunity spaces as clearly as possible. And of course, this type of discovery work requires us to be on the ground to sniff out these unexpected possibilities. We need to know how people make decisions in the context of their environment. For example, how do merchants respond to online food orders while at the same time customers are walking in to dine in? We want to be there to observe the dynamics, and this influences how we design the app. We absolutely want to know the 360 of a person's experience so that we can reduce friction across the journey. As you know, people don't always articulate their challenges in a spoken interview in 1 hour because it might not seem relevant until it's in context. So here you can see Henny looking quite worried, and the driver's brows are furrowed quite anxiously. And we can only detect how severe this very specific pain point was to their experience because we were right there in the moment in the journey. And we could immediately empathize from their point of view. And we were feeling what they were feeling. So this requires being on the ground and literally shadowing their experience to challenge our view of the existing solutions. And we don't do this alone. We often, and in fact, almost always do research with our stakeholders. So we don't need to over explain our findings because they're right there and we can align almost immediately on next steps. And this really helps with research influence. And wherever possible, we don't just collect data, but we like to co-create with our participants. Like for example, how should we organize the home screen of our app? After all, you are also the expert of your own experiences. And then COVID struck. In Singapore, by February of last year, we had already become quite cautious. We were starting to move our research online, but soon we were all working from home, not just us, but even our participants. It felt like turning a switch on and off, like literally one switch, and everything we had to do, every study we planned had to go online. And just as immediately, we confronted a lot of challenges. So Henny's going to go over some of these challenges with us.
Okay, thank you, Nas. One of the challenges is that we lost a crucial source of qualitative data, which was the environment. This is especially important to see the interactions between different players in the marketplace, like merchants and drivers. When we switched to online interviews, we realized that our stakeholder stopped turning up as much as they used to. Why? It could be because we limited how many observers could join the Zoom call, because we don't want to overwhelm the participants. Instead, we stream the interview on Workplace for them to watch. However, watching on a separate platform made them lose their direct connections to the participant. Even when we used two-way mirror, we could still comment whenever the participant said something interesting and share our thoughts during interviews. Now, if the stakeholder had questions, we ask them to type it over Slack and we will pull it together at the end. Our interview sessions were no longer interactive. And even though we limited the observers in our Zoom call, users still seemed to feel uncomfortable. I think they were feeling overwhelmed. Zoom was a new format for them. They looked like they were being interrogated, and it made them more cautious and less candid. So not only did our stakeholders lose their direct connection with our participants also lose their connection with us. Previously, we can have an open conversation with our users about their experiences. We can build a relationship with them. For example, in this photo, we are having lunch with drivers in Vietnam. It's simply more friendly. Rapport and trust were major things we needed to solve. Another problem was the internet. Most of our users in Southeast Asia rely on SIM card providers. We were randomly losing people from the interview. Suddenly they would disappear and we could not contact them. The interview would basically be aborted and it wasn't a good use of time for anyone. And because of the internet connections, usability testing became difficult. We were screen sharing from tools like Figma, Protopie, and Innovations over laptop and give participant mouse control over Zoom to the participants to take over the screen when suddenly the prototype will stop loading. We needed to fix the issue on the spot and everyone will have to wait. This was quite disruptive. We were also quite worried about how to protect the confidentiality of our prototype. How will we prevent leakage online? And what if it goes viral on social media before it's even launched? Of course, we had no choice but to adapt. There are 5 key things that we did. Nas and I will go through it one by one.
These are the challenges we confronted immediately, and just as immediately, we had to adapt. So, the first thing we did was simplify. We could not go to the users and explore their habitats, so some of our researchers empowered the users to be our eyes and ears on the ground. And how did we do this? Through diary studies. Now, diary studies are not a new method, but we did find ourselves leaning on it a little bit more instead of running in depth interviews. So, why did it work? First, it simplified the conversation. Rather than having in depth interviews one to one, we converse with our participants just like we would with friends over WhatsApp. Now, think about it. Think about how much you learn about your friends just by WhatsApping them, or Telegramming them, or SMSing them, right? You share pictures, videos, feelings, observations, you gossip. You learn a ton, and so we did the same. We used natural human language, we responded with emojis, right? We empathize when they complain. We were right there in the moment when things felt surprising. And I think we can safely say that the participants enjoyed the company of our researchers. I mean, how often do you have someone who's so attentive to you throughout the day? And our researchers also enjoyed the interactions. They said it's like making a temporary friend for 6 days. And we learned way more than we expected, which really is what any honest conversation should be, right? It was very organic. I don't even know if you would call it a diary study, more like a WhatsApp study or a Telegram study, a text study, basically digital ethnography, right? And ultimately, it helped us escape the awkwardness that we had confronted with the online interviews. Another reason we love this method is that it still helped us gain rich context. When we're on the ground ourselves, in the cities, on streets, we're exposed to so much stimuli from so many different angles. And we lost all of this, right? Previously you could see myriads of things. You could smell, the pollution, the food, you could touch, right? And tasting good food, right? It's a smorgasbord of stimuli. And that is where the aha moments also come, right? So with a diary study, rather than one touch point, one interview, which deprives us of this exposure, we could have multiple touch points across a day and across many days. We were basically by the side of the participants, shadowing them virtually. This method doesn't completely replace being on the ground, but it was a good substitute, good enough for what we needed. And the whole point of having many touch points is to open ourselves to data from the unexpected corners of people's experiences. And how did it work? So, very briefly for participants, we would start with a briefing to discuss their preferences and their constraints, and then end with a debrief to deep dive into curiosities that we couldn't really get hold of through text at the end of the 10 days, right? For stakeholders, they would join the debrief at the end of each day. So we'd sit down, download what we learned, and we would feed their questions into the next day's conversations, day to day. So in a sense, it's like the stakeholders were a part of the research trip, like a virtual excursion through this methodology. And so the pandemic essentially forced us to lean into methods that were a bit more lean, a bit more agile, and a bit more flexible. So we not only simplified our methods, but the tools, as you can see, right? Our default initially was to use Zoom or Google Meets, because that's what we use at work. But we were truly struggling especially when users are not only not very tech savvy, but also have poor internet connection. These two things were a disaster for any online interview. As Henny mentioned, people literally disappeared. Oh, wait, who's that person? Where's that person? It's like you have to regroup, right? It's quite disruptive. So when we're simply having a conversation and not sharing anything confidential, we just opted for everyday tools. So this photo you see over here is actually a focus group that we ran with people from all around Indonesia on WhatsApp. It was that simple. And we just made it happen. Now, some of you might be wondering, what about all these other tools, UX tools that exist, right, for streaming interviews? There's quite a lot out there. And we've tried some of them, but here's our take. We prefer not to need to teach people how to use a new tool just so they can talk to us. Even if it means saying, hey, click on this link. Because believe it or not, has been hard enough to explain, and we end up biasing our sample group. Also, the internet connection gets laggy because people use SIM cards. And we realized in Indonesia, people are quite sensitive to how much memory they have on their phones. You uninstall and install apps almost like daily. Um, so our take is to use apps that people are already using as much as possible, rather than introducing new software. That could change, but that's where we are right now. Most of our studies, however, still take place over Zoom because of the enterprise security, especially for prototypes. And Henny will walk us through how we dealt with security during the pandemic.
Okay. The next challenges that we needed to solve is security and speed. Grab has offices all across Southeast Asia, so we already have access to people and experiences around the regions. Even Grabbers do things like go to the supermarket, look after their children, and pay their bills. They come from all walks of life. We started this internal user panel by reaching out to the entire company through several communication channels like emails, Workplace, and Slack, and asked people to do a short survey. This keeps the sign-up process simple. We attract them to join the panels by aligning this initiative with Grab missions, elevating the quality of life for everyone. In setting it up, we also faced with challenges. The first challenges that we faced was creating awareness for this initiative and getting people to join the panel. What we do is we work with our HR team to help bless out comms. We even join the new employee groups to engage them and encourage them to join the panel. And the second challenge that we faced was how to operationalize the process. We ran several pilot tests to identify problems and concerns and eventually streamline the process. Now, we use the panel mainly for rapid research like quick guerrilla testings. We discovered that the internal user panels works well with unmoderated testing tools like Maze. Why? Because user can complete any task and answer it whenever they want, and they can do it anywhere, which was great, especially during the lockdown period when we cannot just casually find someone to help test out designs. We are also looking at copying the models to build up user panel for the other user segment that Grab serves, our drivers and merchant partners. It takes a lot of effort, but it's useful. We believe having an internal user panels can help: one, test confidential prototype; two, super quick testing; and three, reduce costs because we are not using any third party and giving incentive, and I don't have to go through long process of quotations and invoices.
The next challenge that we approached was scale. How do you scale empathy? We continue to get a lot of feedback from stakeholders about how they can't travel to the users anymore and how they might be able to understand the context better for which they're building. We have engineers in Beijing, Seattle, our regional team is in Singapore, we're serving Southeast Asia. So, how do we scale empathy across continents? One thing our team started to do was to use rich video and photo media in our reports to make the reports more cinematic. We can't bring stakeholders to the scene, so we bring the scenes to them, right? We make them feel like they're right in the middle of the operations, so they can see how the products are being used in the context. Hear, see, and observe for themselves, but they can't eat. Um, the next one that we, the next thing we've tried exploring is creating kind of short focused films, like 4 to 7 minutes of documentaries. I mean, if you think about how moved we feel when we watch a movie, why can't we bring a similar storytelling style into our research reporting? We've done this before. We did this for drivers. We're exploring this now with merchants. And again, we collaborate with other functions at Grab to distribute the videos more widely. Finally, one other area we're exploring is virtual immersion. We weren't even the ones to suggest this. It came from the product strategy team, and the idea is still evolving. We haven't actually done this yet, but the idea here is to recruit people from different walks of life, say a small shop owner, and have a focus group, not for research, but simply for our stakeholders in different cities to understand their outlook and experiences on the ground. So we're creating a channel for direct interaction, and then as a research team, we would then facilitate a debrief to take away the key observations from that.
We had to focus on rapport. When we do research in persons, it's easier to feel a sense of connections and read people's body language. As Nas mentioned earlier, people felt more awkward online. These are the four things that we did. First, we started experimenting on interactive visual icebreaker to make the interview less intimidating for participants to open up and voice out what they are thinking. We adopted this exercise from a brand called Point of View. In this case, the participant chooses three cards that represented how they feel about COVID and what it means to them. This brings an emotional dimension to our research. It helped people to express themselves in ways. Two, each researchers in our teams have different approaches. One of our researchers likes to use a homey background for her Zoom that shows objects from the local areas. It might seem like a small thing, but it helps to create a familiar atmosphere for the participants and shows a sense of understanding. Three, start by connecting as persons and treat them like friends whom we want to get their honest opinion rather than getting straight to the research questions. We ask people about how is everything at home, how are things with their family. Basically, we spend time acknowledging that we are all stuck at home and coping with the pandemic instead brushing off this reality. Immediately, it gives us something in common and it built mutual empathy. In other words, we slow down a little bit more in the beginning of the interview. And four, many of our participants are not familiar with how to use a laptop and a mouse. However, we still needed to use a laptop for our more confidential prototype. We will share the prototype on our laptop and let the participant take over the screen. This way, they will not be able to take screenshot. To help them become familiar with the clicking and hovering the mouse, one of the designers created this exercise to help to get used to the mouse, to help participants get used to the mouse. Might not be ideal because it is less intuitive, but it definitely helped us to get feedback about our prototype.
And finally, we survived. We won't say too much on this, but look, research takes a lot of energy, and empathy is very emotionally consuming. We were all stuck at home, feeling the weight of uncertainty. Like they say, you gotta put on your own oxygen mask before you can put it on for anyone else. So, as a team, we spent more time connecting with each other, sharing our experiences, and just troubleshooting. If I can be completely honest here, we didn't adapt that fast. At first, we did the bare minimum because we were still figuring things out. Like everyone else, we literally flipped the switch, and there were so many challenges. But we did figure it out, but we did it as a team. So our takeaway here is to recharge, be there for one another, because that's what community is ultimately about. To summarize, here are the 5 things that we did to adapt. First, we simplified to overcome internet challenges, reduce cognitive load, and find a way to gain rich context virtually. Second, scalability to help stakeholders feel engaged and socialize insights in more creative ways.
security, to run research without fear of confidentiality, uh, and sensitivity, to build rapport with our users, and survival, because we deserve it and we owe it to ourselves and to one another.
So thank you so much for your time, and we do look forward to chatting very soon.